She's the pushy broad from the Bronx, New York. Follow her voice, a straight dog is nice. She's the pushy broad from the Bronx, oh yeah. Don't be surprised if you wanna listen twice. Make decisions, find the right choice. Know yourself better, find your own voice. It's okay if you need help today, cause everybody needs a little push. From the pushy broad from the Bronx, New York.
There we go. Welcome, Transformation Talk Radio listeners. My name is Ellen Stewart, and I am the pushy broad from the Bronx. Welcome to my show, Recovery Recharged, with my illustrious co-host, Dr. Pat. How you doing, Doc?
I'm really excited about this show because whenever there are stories about people that rise up, whenever there are stories about surrender, whenever there are stories about graciously recovering, or not so graciously recovering, I get so excited about it. And, you know, Ellen, what you're doing today and who we're speaking with today is so needed today. It's hard to even find the words anymore to say how much we need the message from our very featured guest today.
Absolutely, and the compassion and the fortitude that this best-selling New York Times author displays is absolutely unparalleled. We have a very special guest today, New York Times best-selling author Judy Mandel. She talks about her new memoir, White Flag, which is on Amazon, available to you, in which she seeks to understand the nature of addiction while she struggles to save her beloved niece to fulfill the deathbed promise that she made to her sister. And it is just that compelling. I could not put it down. There are so many questions and so many things we're going to talk about to Judy today. I just want to give you a little bit of a background into her bio. She is a former reporter and a marketing executive. After the death of her parents, she knew that it was time to write the story of her family's emotional and physical survival. And it tells of a devastating plane crash that killed an older sister and left a remaining sister critically burned and close to death. Her first New York Times bestseller was Replacement Child. It is that story. And now she comes across with her second book, her second memoir called White Flag. It's related to her first book, and she's going to tell us how, as she becomes aware of the tentacles of transgenerational trauma stemming from the family tragedy. So we have so much to talk about today and so much to get to with this powerful, powerful book. Welcome to Transformation Talk Radio and my show, Recovery Recharged, Judy Mandel. How are you this morning?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me, Ellen. It's nice to see you. And Pat, it's nice to see you too.
It's great to
Thank
have you.
you.
Yeah,
Thank you
thanks.
so much. Let's start by just telling our listeners a little bit about your first book, Replacement Child, because it directly relates to White Flag. So can you give us a background?
Yeah, sure. It's really the story of my family's survival, as you were saying. And it's about a plane crash in 1952 in Elizabeth, New Jersey. And that plane took the top off of the apartment building they were living in and dumped jet fuel into my mother's kitchen. And it was on fire. My sister, Donna, unfortunately was trapped there. My mother saved 3 people that day, though. I like to, point that out. My mother's kind of my hero. She saved another girl who was visiting Donna, and she saved her own mother, and she saved my sister Linda, who was only 2 years old and was enveloped in flames. I rolled her down the stairs and got her out before the building collapsed right after that. So the way it relates to that is that Linda is the mother of Cheryl, who's featured in White Flag. And, as I did my research into transgenerational trauma, I realized that trauma doesn't go away, that it's with the family. really through the generations, and the awareness of it is important to know. So that's how that relates. That's the thread.
That's how the books are connected.
Right. That's
Yes.
the thread.
And tell us a little bit more about White Flag, why that title, because it means a lot to a lot of people, and it certainly means something to us in recovery.
Yeah.
So why the title White Flag?
Sure. Well, as you pointed out, white flag is, the universal sign of surrender. And for me, the title came about first as was the only way I could find a bed for my niece when she was homeless. And they had a white flag event that they call it when the weather is inclement, and they open up their doors in all the shelters, even if they don't have a bed. And that's the way she found a bed in that last winter, really, of her life in Louisville, Kentucky, where I found that there are many more beds for men than there are for women, which is, I think, an important point too. The other part of white flag is that someone with substance use disorder needs to surrender themselves to the fact that they need help. And the white flag symbolizes that for me, that she had to raise her own white flag. And the third part of that is that I had to raise my own white flag of what I could and could not do for her. So that's the way that came about.
It's such a difficult thing for us to understand how much we can help and how much we can't help. That surrender and the whole idea of that in recovery is really an important concept. Was that an important concept for you, Dr. Pat?
Yeah, and what I want to say, thank you so much for sharing this story, because it's a story that is rarely told. It is the untold story. It's what I call the invisible trauma. Multi-generational trauma is invisible trauma. Somehow we think that, oh, we're going to pop out a new kid. It's going to be a new generation, and we're all good. We're going to be all good. Those of us that are from that experience, no, we're not all good. And, the secrets of past generations is so deadly. But what you're doing is you're telling the story. You're sharing. You're allowing people that are sitting here listening to this show that are thinking, oh my goodness, that sounds like my family. That sounds like me. We're not allowed to talk about it. We were not allowed to talk about my mom's suicide. And for a really long time, nobody told us what it was. But this is the importance. It is the white flag, Ellen, you said so beautifully, and Judy so beautifully. It is the white flag of surrender on the outside and on the inside, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And when you talk about, not talking about things in a family, I like to say that, silence is its own trauma in a family.
Yeah.
Not talking about things. And I know I was certainly felt that in my family. They didn't talk about that accident. They didn't talk about what happened to one sister, and that the other sister was so challenged. It was never talked about. And I know that visited to Cheryl too in her life, with her mother's own struggles.
What I have gleaned from this book is the fact that you were relentless in asking what was going on and trying to find the answers. And that's something that is really courageous and powerful, because knowing what's going on, even though you may not be able to help, but knowing what's going on so that not only can you reconcile it in your own brain, but you can share it with the world, is a very powerful thing. So going with you through every single aspect of what was happening to her. And not only that, but what was happening to you at the time. The questions that were running through your mind were universal questions, I can tell you, that everybody asks. All right. So we really appreciate this kind of thing. But when you talk about white flag as well, you talk about the fact that in order to raise the white flag, one must acknowledge that they need help. And then you talk about the difficulty it is for people to ask for help. So why do you think that is, Judy?
I think some of it is the language that we use, that it instills stigma and shame in people, that they don't want to come forward. So this is one reason that I try to use the word substance use disorder instead of addiction and addict, which have so much shame attached to them. And I think that, releasing some of that shame helps people come forward and realize that they are deserving of help, that they need help. And, opening things up to harm reduction, services also helps with that.
Yeah.
So I think it's the shame why people don't come forward.
Yeah. I'm gonna ditto that. And I love that because you notice we use the word recovery to be very broad.
Yeah.
And we are trying to overturn, oh my God, how many decades? Like 1930s, of this idea of I'm an addict. It's a stigma that's on top of a stigma that gets stigmatized inside your family and outside. I mean, it is a whole
Right.
cycle and a dynamic, as you just talked about.
Yeah. And even the word addict, that I kind of go into this in the book a little bit. The word
I know.
comes from, being a slave, and, in every sense of the word. And just telling someone that makes them feel worthless. And I know my niece Cheryl felt that way. I could see it in every letter that she sent me from when she was in jail. Every letter she sent me talked about how she was unworthy and undeserving, and I tried to bolster her against that feeling that she had.
You're onto something because if I did a little deep dive, wow, like a number of years ago, right, Ellen?
Yeah.
Because I found it interesting we use this language. And now with the digital world, we're not just using it. It's almost, it was almost like coming out as being gay, like that was fashionable. So this seems to be a little bit fashionable, but yet there's so much to learn about it. And here's what I discovered. You can't find the word addict or addiction very much in the literature. You can go back to Marty Mann, and you can go back to even the way these organizations were named. They weren't named Addiction Anonymous, right? Were they?
No,
No, they were
No,
not.
no.
no.
But somehow it became very fashionable to use this. Now, I want to clarify for everybody listening. I do not undermine the power of addiction. I don't. Nicotine, like right at the top of the list, everybody. But when you label yourself as a thing, then how do you undo that label? And I think that's part of what we're talking about, because guilt and shame, Judy, I just want to get back to this if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Guilt and shame are the two peas in the pod of living a life of despair. They are right in there. They gnaw at you. It is like getting a thorn or a splinter in your finger that you just can't find and get rid of. And yet after time, you're so focused on it that it's hard to shake. Is that what you found, Judy?
Yeah, I think that is the crux of why people don't look for help or realize that they're worth the help. And, I think this is also one reason why, even at the needle exchanges, that they find, even going for that bit of help and seeing that people aren't judging them and are just there to help them, helps people reach out for more help to recover.
And what's hopeful and what we see as hopeful now, especially in talking to young people and working with young people in recovery and having young people talk about how they are helping themselves, is to say that I am not my disease. I am in recovery and I am proud to be in recovery, which is saying to the world, just like Pat and I have said to the world many, many times, that we are not the product of something negative and harsh and harmful and that stigma, but we are the product of strength and hope, and sharing that strength and hope across, many multiple platforms, which is why we do this show. And I know that it was something hard for you too, because when Dr. Pat talks about shame and guilt, it's not only the shame and guilt that was brought upon by the person that is struggling to be in recovery, but it's the shame and guilt that you mentioned you went through as the person trying to help the
Sure.
person in that struggle. And not only did you do that because she was your niece, but because you made a promise to your sister. So tell us about that.
Well, when my sister was dying, she died of lung cancer. When she was dying, I said to her, and she had 2 daughters, and I said, don't worry, you can go. I'm going to take care of them. I've got them. And so, that certainly I thought about that the whole time that Cheryl was in trouble at the last part of her life, and wanted to do everything I could. That's the kind of promise you need to keep. And that's what motivated me a lot.
Mm.
It's true.
Well, Cheryl's story was certainly a powerful one, and you tell it in a very compelling way. You talk about her Facebook posts, which are extremely powerful. People should see the kind of person she was talking to you about on the outside, and then trying to get clues as to what was actually going on with her on the inside.
And that,
But
that was one of my purposes, to have those Facebook posts and her actual letters that she wrote me,
Yeah,
is to bring forward, the person that she was.
yeah.
And she, like you say, she was not her addiction, her substance use disorder. It's like looking at somebody with a disease like diabetes. And my hope is that we change that perception.
I'm so
Of-
glad you said that, Judy, and I'm so glad you did it. Here's why. I interview a lot of people, Ellen knows this, and I am like the last one to sit down and want to write a book, but I'm getting a lot of interest from publishers to write on my topic, broken promises. I studied it for 10 years. But part of that is the disclosure of my mom's letters to my dad when she was in Bellevue after her first suicide attempt. Now, how did I get the letters? My stepmom. The guilt and shame for my sister over that incident, who's 12 years older than me, had my stepmom had to wait till my dad died. My dad died. He had thrown them in the garbage. She pulled them out and she kept them until my dad died and
Wow.
then gave them to me. And that led me on a journey to find out what happened to her, because all we knew was she died in a fire. We didn't know she started the fire. But the guilt and shame that my sister carried, 12 years older than me, watching a woman that couldn't take care of herself, on drugs, alcohol. I wish I understood it better. I wish I could have helped my sister, because it ultimately killed her.
Yeah.
And that's why I appreciate what you're doing, because I was not going to put the letters in my book until I read your book.
that's
I
a
think
very powerful thing,
Yeah.
and Judy has discovered it in so many different ways. I want to talk just a little bit about how the book opens up, because it's a really powerful beginning. You talk about writing to her, discovering her in prison. That must have been really overwhelming for you. Can you tell us
It
a little
was.
bit about
It
that?
was, it was actually my sister Linda's birthday, and I was thinking about her and her daughter, Cheryl, who I hadn't heard from in 2 years. I didn't know where she was. I was afraid that she had died. I thought she was certainly on the streets. I didn't know anything. So I Googled her name, and she popped up with a mugshot that she was in an Ohio prison. And I wrote to her there and, wondered if I would hear back from her, and it took a couple of weeks, and I did hear back from her, and that started our correspondence. But I don't think I was able to find her before that. I think there was something different in the way they listed people in prison. But there she was, and it was two things at the same time. It was first a relief. Oh my God, she's alive. And, maybe she's safe right this minute. She's safe. And the other was, oh my God, she's in prison, So it was a dual reaction that I had.
Well, I commend you, first of all, for not running from that, because it's a very scary thing to turn around and say, oh my God, my niece is in prison. I don't want to have anything to do with it. That is very common for many people to think that way. But to turn around and to continuously correspond with her, to help her, to give her some money in the commissary so that she can feel a little bit more self-respect and self-worth, and to continue that relationship with her, gave her hope. And I think it gave you hope too. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I did talk to some friends. I talked to a friend who's a social worker, and she said it's really important you put money in the commissary. I was worried about that. Should I do that? I wasn't sure. And she said, yes, it's very important, that they know somebody cares about them. And certainly that had a big effect on her. I sent her books, and we could talk about them. She was a voracious reader, and we talked about the books. And I talk about that in the book too, which books I sent her and why I thought I would send her those books. And I'm glad we had that. We had a relationship again, which I was grateful for. I was very grateful for that.
Judy, I have a question for you, because here's what I'm struck by, and I don't know the answer to it. When I look at the books and I read the books and get to know you here today, there is a question. I would love to know how this journey, first book, second book, how the journey changed you.
Mhm. Well, my first book was a journey of understanding who I was, and that it's called Replacement Child. And I was writing the book for at least a year before I came upon that term, replacement child. They call it a syndrome, that was noted in like 1964. And so, I came upon that, and I realized that so many of those features applied to me. And I thought, well, how am I a replacement child? Why didn't that dawn on me that I was the replacement for my sister who died? It was only within another year that my mother had me. And certainly it made so much sense. So that was a journey in itself. With White Flag, it was a journey to really understand substance use disorder, which I didn't understand, and understanding how it led back to my past and my niece's past, and how that is all interrelated, and how so many things make it a complex disease.
Wow.
So when you're the one thing that impressed me is you kept asking Cheryl, you kept being extremely hopeful. You kept saying to her, why don't you try this and why don't you try that? And I'll help you find a place to live. I'll help you find treatment, all of these things. And she said, of course, what everybody says to me who starts recovery coaching, meetings aren't for me. I've got a handle on this. I don't really need them. I just know I'll never go back to doing drugs again. So as a person who is approaching this as a parent, as an aunt, as a concerned woman, did you really believe everything she was saying at the time, or did your gut instinct get the better of you here?
That part worried me a lot, that she wouldn't try the things that were accessible to her at that time. I think things have changed a bit since that time. This was 2017.
Yeah.
And there are more things available, medically assisted treatment and more social services. I think, I'm not sure about where she was in Kentucky, but the fact that she had these meetings available, especially in prison and in, the halfway house that she was in for a while, and she wouldn't take advantage of those. And part of it was the religious aspect that she bristled against. And that did worry me quite a bit, that she wouldn't do that. But I have to say, I listened to her. She said, I'm never going back to that. That's not part of the problem. I wish, this is one thing I do wish that I had done, is go there at that point and given her a drug test so she couldn't deny it, because she was still using, and of course lied to me about that.
Dr. Pat, do you find that today, I mean, all of the stuff that we do in the past 3 years in this show, and you and I, of course, are avid 12-steppers. Do you find that the 12-step modality in your personal work and everybody you talk to is evolving, or do you find that people are using other methods to stay clean and sober?
So no, COVID was the greatest gift to addiction you can imagine. It was the best and the worst gift to anybody in recovery, substance abuse, any kind of abuse, anything you want to talk about. Now, why do I say that? Ellen knows this about me. I have been GSR. I have been representative of tri-state, multiple state parts of boards. I am a Marty Mann fan because she did not pay attention to the guidelines of Alcoholics Anonymous, and she went on television and she talked about it. She set up her own organization. So here's what COVID did. I know, I'm excited, right? I can't tell you how many conference meetings of those organizations I presented a package that said online meetings work. They are safe. Deaf ears, right? Anonymous. COVID comes. What did we do, Ellen?
Online meetings, they
Boom.
work.
That was the greatest savior for people. People came to meetings that never went to in-person meetings. If you didn't like the spiritual tone and you did not want to say the Our Father, like one of the meetings I went to in Jersey, you can go to the meetings here in Seattle. Spiritual, not religious. You could go to meetings. I went to meetings in Belgium. I went to meetings in Germany. It let Pandora out. And that is a genie that cannot go back. So for me, when we're talking about this now, when we're talking about the time you were at, it was not available.
No.
You couldn't talk about it. And Ellen and I, we decided we're just going to do a show. And it's not just her and I. I have got Ellen, I've got Kelly Bazzani, I got Susan Dene, and they have come out of the box and we're talking about this. But something about what happened in COVID energized us. I don't know, Ellen. I don't know how to explain it any better.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And we're going to talk much more about all of this and much more about Judy's book. And also, we want to hear from Judy as to how she feels about how treatment is going and the observations that she's made, considering her niece's, situation. And we want her to talk with other parents and other people who are really struggling with the same thing.
How do we find out more about Judy and her book?
There
How do we
we
get
go.
a copy of her book? How do we
Judy.
find out, Judy?
You can go to judymandel.com, or you can go to Amazon and look up Judy Mandel White Flag. You can go into your local bookstore and ask for it. White Flag is the name.
Yeah, I'm going to answer this text. Marty Man, look it up. Marty Man is not a man. Marty Man is a woman. Google Marty Man. You can Google the television show I've Got a Secret, where they had to find the addict out of the 3 people and never thought it was her. The alcoholic out of the 3 people. She was on the television show from back in the day. What's my secret? And the question was, which one of you 3 is an alcoholic? Let's take a short break. When we're back, no more secrets. Okay, I just got to say it before you say anything. Every time I hear that, it brings me back to my childhood in the Bronx. And Betty, am I allowed to mention this? White Castle hamburgers.
Oh my God. Oh my God. I can't believe you said White Castle hamburgers on Allerton Avenue in the Bronx.
Well, there was one in Elizabeth, New Jersey, too, that we.
Yes, there was. Yes, I'm a Jersey girl. I graduated Plainfield.
There still is.
Is it really? Every time I say
we
that,
stop there all the time.
I remember that as the first fast food place. We even have home movies about us being at White Castle. It was such a big thing when they used to come out to us on roller skates and put the trays on the windowsills. Okay. So now that everybody knows we're both 150 years old, we'll continue onward. Oh my goodness. This is Ellen Stewart. I am the pushy broad from the Bronx. I'm here with Dr. Pat. I'm here with Judy Mandel. We're talking about her very, very interesting book called White Flag. I do need to tell you that as a recovery coach, especially this time of year, if you are struggling, if you need help, if you are like Judy and are a parent or a loved one concerned about what's happening to your loved one this time of year, I need you to call me at 800-889-1757. If you're in the United States, if you are abroad, go to pushybroadfromthebronx.com, make a free appointment with me to have an initial consultation. I will give you resources. I will help you, especially during this time of year. And now that everybody thinks there's no more COVID, everybody's out, everybody's partying, everybody's doing the kinds of things that get them into trouble this time of year. So just know that I'm here for you as a recovery coach, and I will certainly help you get through this difficult time. So, and you can find Judy's book, as she said, on Amazon.com.
Or go to her website.
Judy Mandel.
Judy Mandel. Also,
Yes.
if you all want to call in, I thank you. I did get your text message. I'm going to give out the call-in number. 1-800-930-2819 is the call-in live to this show right now. 1-800-930-2819. If you are not listening to this show live and you have a question, you can still dial that number and our producers will pick it up and they will get the message to Judy or Ellen. 1-800-930-2819. Okay, sorry. Just want to say
It's
that.
okay. All right. So, Judy, first of all, I found it interesting that you take this book, White Flag, and you label it an investigative memoir. Okay, rather than just a novel. Can you tell us why you call it that?
Because I think it's more investigative than it is memoir. That I did so much research, and actually the bibliography is probably, a resource that is very helpful to people trying to find the answers to those questions that we all have. Why did they become, addicted to drugs? Why did they start using drugs? Why couldn't they stop when that they wanted to stop? These were all the questions that I had. And, there aren't easy answers to any of those questions, as you know. It's very complex, and for each person, it's different. And I think the investigative part was the reading and research and talking to people that I did. And I felt like that was even more of the book than my piece.
I just saw something on Disney that I have to call your attention to because it goes to this message. There is a movie on the Disney Channel called Spirited. It is now with Ryan Reynolds and Will Ferrell. And what it is about is, can someone be redeemed? Can they change? Is it possible for someone? And Will Ferrell is Scrooge. Is it possible for Scrooge to change? Can people change? Can they be redeemed? So based on your book, Judy, and based on what you've learned, do you think it's possible at any age to actually fix and change your life?
I think so. I believe that. I believe people can change. My son's a social worker, so we talk about this a lot. And he says to me, I couldn't be in this business if I didn't believe people could change, and that, I could help them. And he sees, and I see people change all the time. And I believe it. Even with, brain chemistry, with substance use, I believe that can be reversed with certain lifestyle changes as well. And be awareness of what goes into this complexity, I believe, is part of the answer. So yeah, I absolutely believe at any age people can
Dr.
change.
Pat, this is the age-old question. Is it a fix or a change? What do you think?
I think it's a transformation. I think when you take this journey, it's a transformation. Whether you succeed in terms of language or pass fail, whether you think you've passed or failed, you are transformed. It doesn't matter, because the experience, just the acknowledgement that your life is a mess and you want to do something about it, even if you don't get to what that end game is, it's transformation. It screams in the 9-step promises. I couldn't read the steps. I had to memorize the promises. I had to hold on to them, because that was the only thing I could hold on to. If you told me that I would have this freedom, that I would not be baffled anymore, if you promised them to me, the fact that they called them promises, hello, right? But you will be transformed, just like Judy. Everything in the book is transformative. Your life is transformative. What you're doing to help people is transformative. What you're doing, Ellen, is the same thing. I have a network called the Transformation Network, Transformation Talk Radio. Why? Because I see my life as that. I never thought I'd be here today talking to you two. And honestly, in my high school book, they basically, when they found me for the high school reunion, they said to me one thing: is this really you? Are you Pat Baccili from Plainfield High School? I said, yes. They said, you're not dead.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm not dead. No. He said, we thought by now you'd be dead. We knew you were homeless, but we thought for sure you'd never get your act together.
Wow.
I did.
Well, if
You did. Did.
Judy's book is any indication, Dr. Pat, you have to absolutely write your memoir. There's
I
no
was going to say,
question.
I want to read your book. I
There you
absolutely want to
go.
read your book.
There you go.
You know,
So
it's always hardest to tell our own story, though, isn't it?
yeah, but you know,
Yeah.
you're doing a great job of it. And I'm very, very glad that Recovery Recharged over the past 3 years has given you an open platform to
It
do
has.
that.
Yeah. Never
Where
talked
you-
about it before. On
I
air 20
know.
years, Judy. The
I
show is
know.
20 years old. And
Wow.
I couldn't talk about, I didn't know how.
Sure.
So I am thrilled that I've been able to make it available to you to talk about it so we can talk about it together, because I know you've said things here that you've not said anywhere else.
Oh, you
And
bet.
Judy, I know that you felt that too in this book, and there were some surprising revelations that have come out of this story for you. So can you talk a little bit about some of the things you've learned that will help our audience?
Sure. Well, like I was saying before, the complexity was of substance use disorder was certainly something I did not understand. How, even when if you start young, the brain chemistry changes so much that it's harder and harder to stop. The metaphor that I liked that found was you're careening down a hill in a car, you're about to go off the cliff and you're putting your foot on the brake, and you're pounding on the brake, but the brake doesn't work. And I keep feeling like that was Cheryl, that she wanted to stop. She kept putting her foot on the brake, but she didn't have the capacity to do that. And the understanding of what that does to your brain was an essential part for me, understanding.
Mhm.
Tied in with she had depression. That was part of it. I found out there was sexual abuse in her childhood, which I believe was also another piece of the puzzle that I thought might have happened, but I found out it was absolutely true. And so that, coupled with the generational trauma, with her mom and our family, it was almost too much. It was too much. It was too much for me to tackle without even knowing what I was up against. And I wish that she had known more about it. I don't think she was aware of hardly any of this.
Yeah.
Were you from the old school where so many people say that because they didn't understand addiction, you felt that maybe she just wasn't strong enough to overcome it, or you didn't realize that all these factors were contributory to it? I mean, where were you
Absolutely,
before you did the
absolutely. In the
research?
beginning, that's true. And especially, I only knew a fraction of what my sister went through with Cheryl and her substance use disorder over the years. I wasn't aware of all of the rehabs that she had been sent to until later, when I was, researching the book. I wasn't aware that she had been in prison before, in jail at least. There were so many factors that I just was not aware of. I know my sister at one point said, "I can't do anything anymore," and she kind of shut her out, which was, the old way of tough love. And now I realize, and back then I thought, well, maybe you have to do that. Now I think that is totally the wrong way to approach this at all. That tough love, letting somebody hit bottom, could be they're going to die. And I think keeping people alive is much more important than that.
Yeah.
Just keep them alive until they either wave their own white flag and look for help. But as you said before, as long as they're alive, there's hope.
There's a
I wanna,
very fine line, isn't there, Dr. Pat, between, like what
there
Judy
is.
said, this is a conversation in itself, and we'll go into it a little
Yeah.
bit more, but the difference between tough love and enabling. Yeah.
It is a very fine line, but here's what it was going to be an uphill battle anyway, because you're talking about a couple of states, whether it's Tennessee, West Virginia, or Alabama.
Kentucky, Mississippi, right.
Here's the news flash for everybody. Whenever you say which states in the United States like are up there, everybody wants to say New York. They're not even in the top 20. And so your point, Judy, about the situation, but where this was happening was in a place that you could not be in front of drugs. And the numbers are startling, and they've gotten worse. I mean, you're talking about like Alabama, 98 retail opioid pain relief prescriptions per 100 people. I mean, 51.5 drug overdose deaths in West Virginia. I mean, you're talking about numbers that nobody wants to talk about. And the shocker is Vermont. So when you look at these and you look at my state, Washington state, and you think like we're the first to legalize marijuana, first, is this we're first to legalize domestic partnerships and marriage. Our governor did both in 1 year. We're not even on the list. So people that live in those places, they don't have the access that we're talking about here. And every street corner, you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. I think, I think the important part is to make treatment more accessible than the drugs.
Absolutely. Right? And in
So
the states I'm mentioning, it's not.
And in Kentucky, where Cheryl was, when I started to even trying to find her a bed, in a shelter, and I found, I went to the shelter that she was at, the Salvation Army, and I saw, all of these beds for men and this tiny little alcove for women. Yeah. And, I said, what is this about? And that was the case in the whole state.
And I understand, but there is also a class system in treatment too. And these are the things that we're going to break wide open when it comes to the new network at TTR, because if you have the money or if you have good insurance, you get a certain kind of treatment. And if you don't have the money and you don't have good insurance, you get another kind of treatment. And it's a very, very difficult situation to process, and more resources are now beginning to be developed to help people. And even though your story was back in 2017, Judy, in 2017, it's only been 5 years, but it has vastly changed in this arena, and so many things are popping up in a really good way. But the thing that I think that families and parents and people like you have to understand is that there is such a thing as dual diagnosis. It may not always be the addict that is only worried about whether or not they want to pick up a drink or a drug. It comes from the things that you listed. It comes from epigenetics. It comes from the transgenerational trauma. It comes from the brain chemistry, originally. It comes from the fact that effective rehabilitation for her was very scarce. And you also talked about a failing prison system, and you also talked about big pharma flooding the communities with opioids. So just touch on that for a second. What did you find out?
Well, I did find out that, it was certainly a period of time when, we'll go back to fentanyl, was part of the picture in Kentucky. People were dying in droves in Kentucky at that moment in time. Fentanyl was in every drug they were finding, and it was certainly in hers, from the autopsy report. So yeah, big pharma, flooding. There's no way that those drugs didn't find their way to the street when we know that. Even, I even know that, one of the people that I interviewed that was a friend of Cheryl's said that her and her boyfriend were crushing up, oxy pills and, snorting those as their drug. And so it was out there. It was, definitely out there. Epigenetics is a fascinating topic that's a little bit, hard to explain and understand, which I try to do that. I actually have my stepson is a neurobiologist, and he's a professor, and he explained it to me about how DNA can, it's not the DNA that gets passed down, it's the way that it reacts. And he has a way of explaining it as balls of yarn, and the balls of yarn are connected, by one yarn, and you can change the way the behaviors from those DNA balls of yarn react. So it's not something that can't be changed. Even epigenetics can be changed from, by lifestyle changes. And transgenerational trauma also. I mean, just the awareness and being, cognizant of where that behavior comes from is so important. You mentioned dual diagnosis, and my niece was diagnosed with depression, I think just in jail. That was the first time, and we were able to get her some medicine while she was in the Ohio jail. But when she went to Kentucky, they didn't have it. They didn't give it to her. And so she went, right back down. And it was a struggle each time. The prison system is something that really riles me, because there was a time they wouldn't let me send her books, for heaven's sakes. I wrote like a 2-page letter to the warden about how the books were a lifeline. It had no effect.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's troubling, and systems need to be changed. But as you say, there is hope that things are changing. There's more accessibility to medically assisted treatment, to counseling, but there is there's a difference in people who have insurance and people who have money and people who don't.
Yeah,
And
I
I
want
hope
to just
that
comment
changes.
on this, Judy, for one thing,
Yeah, yeah.
because this problem did not go away right now where we sit. Even in the 12-step programs, Ellen, there is a stigma. If you are working with someone and they say, I think I should go on antidepressants, there are many people still that look at that. I was turned away by a sponsor because my psychologist put me on antidepressants after a major loss. And, there are some people that hold a really hard line, almost punitive with this. And that has got to change. See, we are not doctors. People are underneath almost everyone I've ever worked with is exactly what you're talking about, Judy. Underneath that are generational traumas, are personal traumas, are reasons that people are depressed, chemical imbalances, you name it. But boy, we have got to stop stigmatizing getting people help.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we got,
Absolutely.
yeah. And I say this to you all listening, do not do this without doing your own homework and research. If your doctor prescribes a drug and you look it up and you say, ooh, I don't think that's for me, go back, ask questions. We're not doctors here in that capacity. So
Right.
nothing we say here is medical, but I want to say to everybody listening, do your homework, do your research.
She even
And
told
get help from
yeah, sorry.
get help from trusted professionals. Okay. That's why we'll be able to direct you to the right resources. The thing that has changed drastically, even in the 18 years that I am working in treatment and I'm working in behavioral health, especially in the past 2 or 3 years, dual diagnosis has been an accepted form of treatment in most 12-step recovery rehabs. Okay. You can no longer go into a rehab and not talk about the mental health issues that brought you here. I have never talked to any other addict or alcoholic without them telling me that their trauma or their mental health has not brought them here for one reason or another. It is ridiculous to think that those two are not linked. Those two are constantly linked. And until we understand that treatment has to include both of those things, it will constantly be an enigma for us to try to get the right help for people.
Oh, I
And
totally
I
agree.
know, Judy, what you've been through. And I know that we have about 5 minutes left. And I want you to be able to talk to us with a personal message. I want you to tell us what you hope readers will take away from this book and also from our time together today.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for that. I think what I want people to look at this differently. I'm hoping that, by reading this book, they have a different perspective, and they look at, if they have a loved one who has substance use disorder, I hope they look at them as if they have a disease like diabetes, and that they can help them and show them that they're still loved and they're worth it. They're worth your time and they're worth saving.
Do you think you would have done anything differently if you knew then what you know now?
Yeah, I do.
And exactly what would that have been so that our readers or our listeners may want to do the same thing?
I think I would have stopped asking myself, when is she going to stop? Why is she still doing this? I would have gone there when she was in the biggest trouble at the end of her life. It was, I was in Connecticut, she was in Kentucky. It was, Christmas time. It was this time of year, exactly, as a matter of fact. And it was, so this was, I wish I'd gotten on a plane and gone there and seen for myself, so that I didn't believe her when she told me she wasn't using, and talked to her about, what are we going to do? Do you want to go to rehab? Do you want help to, stop? Or can I help you at least live, stay alive until we're ready for that? And that's what I wish I had done.
Dr. Pat, what do you think about that?
I'm right there with her, because I think about what I could have done differently with my sister. you know, especially once I got a sense. You know, my sister and my stepmom died 2 years apart in 1992, 1 year apart in 1991, 92. I'm in 2 years of sobriety, and you know, I also have that list, Judy, because I now know more. It's not that I regret, I didn't know any better. I didn't know what I didn't know. Let me just put it like that. But now I think back, and this is the hope for the future, Judy, isn't it? That see what
Yeah.
we now know, it's not about changing the past, we can't, but it is about structuring, sculpting the future, which has more possibilities for people. Isn't that part of your message, Judy?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And keeping people alive, meeting them where they are is, I think, the important piece also.
Yeah.
And how important now, today, is the serenity prayer to you, Judy?
Well, you know, it's my sister had a medallion with the Serenity Prayer on it as long as I can remember, and it was given to her because of all the struggles she was going through physically and emotionally because of her burns and her surgeries. It took me a long time to even know that that was the prayer that was the Alcoholics Anonymous prayer. I had no idea really until, you know, many years later. But I always, you know, kind of leaned on that as well. And still, it's a very meaningful prayer.
Judy, tell us where to find your book again and your website.
Sure, it's judymandel.com. So JUDYMANDEL.com. And my book is White Flag. You can find it anywhere books are sold.
If you need help, especially during this difficult time of the year, pushybroadfromthebronx.com, my 800 number, 800-889-1757. Dr. Pat, take us out.
I want to thank everybody today, but Judy, I want to ask you this question. What is your personal message for those listening, not just through the holidays, but to their hearts? What do you want to leave us with today?
Let this person know in your life that you love them. That's my personal message. Be the one person that they know they can count on when they're ready to surrender, when they're ready to raise their white flag, that you will help them do that. And if they never do, let them know you love them anyway.
Wow.
That's
Thank
it.
you. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Colton. Thank you, Benny. And I want to thank the audience most of all. You know, you are the most incredible audience. I know what you will do with this show. You will pass it on. You will talk to your friends about it. You will say some things. You'll use the term white flag. They'll ask you, what does that mean? Send them to this episode. Send them to Judy. Send them to Ellen. Thank you all. We'll see you next time.
This is Ellen Stewart, the Pushy Broad from the Bronx, saying thanks for listening. And remember, everybody needs a little push.
From the pushy broad from the Bronx, New York.